Welcome back to AICE Textbook Translations. This is our unit on AICE International History. This will not only review and recap the concepts of the book, but also translate them into modern words so you can get the information right through your smart, beautiful brain. I am your host, Jorge Dagger. Let's get right into it. Welcome back, guys. I hope all of you guys are having an amazing day. Now it's time to lock in and study because your test is in a few weeks, okay? That's the point of this, right? So 2.4 is a very long chapter. So what I'm going to do is part A, I'm going to quickly skim through it so you guys are not here for 40 minutes. But then I'm going to make an extra bonus video containing the actual real nitty-gritty meat of the issue, especially as it comes to the structure of the League of Nations. We're going to go over it right now, but we're just going to outline it really quickly. Like, we're not going to really do much of getting into it that much, as I want to do a separate bonus video explaining that issue. Okay, first, chapter 2.4a talks about the aims, membership, and structure of the league. So the League of Nations was an idea by Woodrow Wilson to have a worldwide place where countries could connect and talk things out, like a worldwide always peace conference to keep peace during tumultuous times, right? This was brought upon mainly in New York and London, where they created two separate associations for this goal. Wilson, at the Paris Peace Conference, pushed for the creation of the League of Nations. He succeeded, and he developed the covenant. He suggested that a covenant, which is a binding agreement between nations, like two or more nations, be developed to create the League of Nations. And he succeeded in this. And therefore, he got a Nobel Peace Prize, which is one of the 5 Nobel Peace Prizes awarded. It is an award created by Alfred Nobel, a Swedish industrialist. It is awarded to those who have done the most to encourage international peace and harmony. So, of course, creating a worldwide network for peaceful arbitration and stuff like that is definitely considered Nobel Peace Prize worthy. So, now that we talked about arbitration was the main goal of the League of Nations, right? Arbitration is settling disputes between two parties by an impartial third party. If you speak Spanish, you can get this from the word árbitro, which means a referee. Think about how a referee settles disputes between two players by saying red card, green card, no foul, things like that. This is basically what the League of Nations did. Now, we just got over the League of Nations, its purpose, how it came about. Let's talk about their 3 aims, right? There's 3 reasons why it was created, 3 reasons why people thought it was necessary. So first was preventing future war, right? We had just gotten out of World War I, which, Wilson had deemed the war to end all wars, and he got this from a book in 1914 called The War That Will End War. It was made by British author H.G. Wells, and he used it kind of to say that there would never be another major war and that he would do everything in his power to prevent it. That's how Wilson used it. It was a big illusion of his time. This was one of the aims of the League of Nations. The second aim was to administer the Paris Peace Settlement. What this basically means is that the Paris Peace Settlement, right? It's the Paris Peace Conference, everything that we discussed, right? The splitting of lands and things like that. That all had to be administered because it was so controversial. Like, people were successor states were fighting over it. Countries themselves were fighting over stuff. Like, it was a whole mess during this time. And they were like, you know what, fine, we need someone to really tell them, okay, you can have this, you can have that. Think about how the Supreme Court interprets the law. The League of Nations was made to interpret the Paris Peace Conference and its terms. Also, promoting international cooperation, like I said, this would be like a huge meeting place where countries would meet, and they would be like, oh, yes, let's kind of meet up here, discuss things peacefully, and really not create any more conflict in this world that already has enough conflict. Because think about it, you just got out of World War I, so we don't want that anymore. Next is the concept of collective security. So collective security is the idea that if any member state of the League was threatened, all the other members would have to work together to defend it. Now, this is the reason why the League didn't have an army, right? The covenant of the League said, once you're a member here, if one of the members gets attacked, we're going to all attack them. Now, this was very unpopular because some countries just didn't have the manpower, or some countries just didn't want to start another war. So, So basically what was what was done in these cases when no one wanted to provide armies was imposing economic sanctions, which is when you refuse trade with a nation that was acting in defiance of the League's judgments. And this was basically thought of like a way to kind of, simmer down the relationships. And before we continue, the League of Nations was established in Geneva, Switzerland. This was chosen as the location since it was where the International Red Cross was started. And it was started here in Geneva, well, there in Geneva, in 1863 with the aim of easing the suffering of those adversely affected by war. The International Red Cross has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize on 3 occasions: 1917, 44, and 63. Those are the 3 times when they have been given as an association the Nobel Peace Prize that we just discussed. So now let's move on to the structure of the league, right? Really quickly, let's run through it. The General Assembly, every country won here. They could send up to 3 delegates, but no matter how many delegates they sent, they all had one vote as one country. The only weakness of this part of the league was that they needed for every country to agree on everything. It was unanimity. A unanimous decision is a decision that is agreed upon by everyone in the League of Nations General Assembly. For example, a single country could prevent a decision taken by voting against it. So if a resolution came about saying, oh, Germany should lose this land, if Germany says, no, I don't want to lose it, they're like, have our hands tied on that. So, that really wasn't good. Now, the council was the one that dealt with the most things, right? The council was kind of like the Security Council of the UN today. And it had permanent and non-permanent members. So the permanent members were like the biggest countries of the world. The USA would have been here. The things that they never joined the League of Nations, even though they were one of the main people pushing to create it. And the non-permanent members, they switched every 3 years, I'm pretty sure. And they were increasing by number. So at first it was just 4, then it was 6, then 9, and then 11 by 1933 when Japan and Germany left. There was 11 non-permanent members in the council. And this was called the Council of Ambassadors, and it was an intergovernmental agency founded in 1920 with the task of implementing the terms of the Paris Peace Settlement, it's a big tongue twister, and mediating territorial disputes between European states. Chaired by the French Foreign Minister, the other nations represented were Britain, Italy, and Japan, and the USA had observer status only, but it could not, this means that it could only oversee the rulings, but it could not actually participate in changing said rulings. Next was the Secretariat. The Secretariat is really like the people who get to do the nitty gritty of the work. They're the ones that deal with the most tedious things. They were the ones that deal with really day-to-day stuff, things that they can't be bothered with in the GA, things like paperwork and auditing things, assigning roles, things like that they really couldn't do in the GA because, they just didn't have the time for that, and it wasn't in their priority list, and you couldn't just call every single country to Geneva for every single decision. So the Secretariat took care of minor decisions. Next was the Permanent International Court of Justice. They would arbitrate the disputes. We already discussed what arbitration is. However, the Permanent Court of International Justice is often referred to as the World Court or the Permanent Court, and it had some success in the 1930s, but it became less used in the 1930s. And the World Court stopped existing in this concept in 1946, and the UN replaced it with the International Court of Justice that's still around to this day in the same Hague, in the same concept as the World Court, just under different administration and more global relevance. So that really healed it. But this was basically like a court where a country could take another country to court, like they couldn't sue another country, but if a country was accused of war crimes, the court would hear the case of both countries and then decide. Really simple. Another way that they helped diplomacy or seek to help diplomacy. Now, commissions and committees. These were specialized troops. I don't mean like military troops. I mean like troops, like groups. Well, groups would have been a better word. Specialized groups sent to examine either really niche things like women's rights, child's rights, workers' welfare, repatriation of prisoners of war, which was a huge thing. These prisoners of war had to be returned. When you repatriate someone, it's basically like returning people, like prisoners of war, refugees, or migrants to their countries of origin. So World War I caused a lot of migrants, a lot of refugees, and a lot of prisoners of war that ought to be repatriated. So they made a council for repatriation. They made a council for women's rights, for things like that. Like, once again, the Secretariat, the Council, and the GA were too busy to deal with. There was a commission for that to give that issue the focus it deserves. Like I said, this was a really quick run through. There is a bonus video on the same channel on this issue only, but we're already cutting it too long for this video. Okay, so once again, like I said, 2.4 is long, okay? So 2.4b is no different. However, this one we can effectively divide into two sections that I'm going to call 2.4b1 and 2.4b2. 2.4b1 and 2.4b2 are both going to be talking about collective security and the resolution of disputes in the League of Nations, but 2.4b1 is going to be successes and 2.4b2 is going to be failures. Right now, we're going to talk about the successes. Their first success was in Teschen in 1920. This was an area disputed by Czechoslovakia and Poland that was previously part of Austria-Hungary and was very industrial, very profitable land, so they both wanted it. The League of Nations split it in two. This was Poland, this was Czechoslovakia, they both got half. And they were not completely satisfied, but they didn't go to war over it and just let it go. So it was a success, right? The Åland Islands of 1921. The Åland Islands were islands that belonged to Finland, but they had a majority Swedish population. Now, up until 1918, Finland had been part of Russia. Finland had lost them in the Great Northern War earlier, like 2 centuries ago. So they didn't really want to challenge Russia to a war. But now that it was Finland and there was a League of Nations where they could take it up with, they were like, hey, listen, the people in the Åland Islands, just now that Finland became independent, they want to be part of Sweden. We want to be part of Sweden. They speak Swedish. They're majority Swedish. They want to do it. And the League of Nations was like, so no, they're staying with Finland. They're being Finnish now. And while Sweden didn't do anything, they did not support the decision, and they sent a very strongly worded letter saying that there was no consent from the people. The people clearly wanted to be Swedish. They should have done a plebiscite and whatnot. So they did that, but they didn't go to war, and that's what made it a success, period. Upper Silesia in 1921, similar to Teschen, but the reason why this region had to be split up was because the people there couldn't decide for themselves if they wanted to be German or if they oh my god, sorry guys. If they wanted to be German or if they wanted to be Polish. So what the League of Nations did was like, you know what? If you guys can decide, we'll once again split it into Germany got half, Poland got half. Boom. They were both happy and they both let it go, so it was a success. Now, the Yugoslavia-Albania border dispute was much more complicated. This was an actually complex issue where Yugoslavia and Albania went to war over this, right? They sent troops, both of them. They were both ready to fight. But then the League of Nations, sorry, I almost said UN. The League of Nations created a commission to go investigate the issue. And from this, they determined, listen, Albania is in the right. So Albania gets to win the border dispute, right? They were disputing an area, Albania gets it, not Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia bitterly complained. Like, they were bitter about this. They were pissed. They were like, no, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine. League of Nations didn't pay attention. Yugoslavia didn't keep going to war. They left Albania alone. So once again, it was a success. The next success was in Memo in 1923. Memo was a port that in the Treaty of Versailles, in the Treaty of Versailles was left as an international area, an international city, an international port. However, Lithuania, that was newly independent, was like, listen, most people in Memo are majority Lithuanian, like most people are Lithuanian. So how about we get the port? And the League of Nations was like, so we don't really want to give one country the support. We want to still keep it. So just for that, we don't want to give it to you. So, and then Lithuania was like, but I want it. And then back and forth until the League of Nations was like, you know what? Fine. What we're going to do is that we are going to keep the port itself, like the docks, everything, all that is ours. You got to keep the surrounding city. And Lithuania was like, I'll take it. And they just stayed, left it alone, period. No more to that, and no military action. Next success was in Mosul in 1924. Mosul was an area in the British Mandate of Iraq that used to be a part of the Ottoman Turkish Empire. So the Turks were like, no, this is ours, this is ours, this is ours. And Britain was like, so no, you lost the war. We have a mandate over Iraq, and we have to get this working. And they were like, okay. So after they said okay, they decided that it was time. They had to take it to the League of Nations, None of them were happy. And then the League of Nations was like, so Britain's in the right. Like, this is it. Britain's in the right. And that's it, Britain is in the right. And they're keeping the oil fields in Mosul. And the Turkish were like, and then the League of Nations was like, okay, case closed, next case. And that's how it ended. No war, no escalation. Next was the Greece-Bulgaria border dispute. It was similar to what happened in Yugoslavia and Albania, except that the countries weren't fighting. It was Greece invading Bulgaria and Bulgaria being like, hey guys, so telling the army like, "Hey guys, don't really shoot back. We don't really want war right now." And the army was like, "We'll try our best." So what they ended up doing was just not shooting back, refusing to do anything, and then the League of Nations got involved. They told Greece, "Leave now." Greece complied, and they're like, "Okay, fine. Now you're gonna pay Bulgaria." That's it. That's how it ended. Greece paid Bulgaria. They were bitter about it, but it was a success because he didn't go to war. Basically, if they didn't end up going to war, it was a success. It doesn't matter if both parties were happy or not. As long as they didn't go to war, it was a success. Okay, so our last section was successes of the League of Nations. Now let's look at failures. The failures are shorter, but they're still important. The first failure they had was in 1920 in Vilna. Vilna was the capital or the proposed capital of the new country of Lithuania, and Poland wanted it. These two countries were created in the Paris Peace Conference, so therefore it was like the first big conflict between two new countries, two successor states. So this is like a big deal, right? Basically, what ended up happening was that Lithuania wanted to keep it. The League of Nations told Poland, "Listen, can you not invade it? Like, can you remove your troops?" And they were like, "Sure, I guess." But by 1922, they came back even stronger, took Vilna. And the reason why the League of Nations didn't really prevent it was because Britain and France were on Poland's side, mainly because they wanted to keep them as an ally against Germany that could potentially grow bigger and stronger. And they really feared that. So they were like, "You know what, let's keep Poland on our good side." But by doing this, they really messed up in this case since they were preventing the league from carrying out its original purpose. Now, our next failure was the Treaty of Riga. Basically, this is when, once again, Poland invaded Soviet territory. The Soviet Union lost even more territory to Poland. The exact figure is 31,000 square miles or 80,000 square kilometers to Poland. Now, the League of Nations took Poland's side for two main reasons. Once again, um, Russia was not a member of the League at this time. And secondly, Russia was highly unpopular due to their communist government in Europe at the time. Our third failure was the invasion of the Ruhr or the Ruhr crisis, which is when Belgium and France invaded the Ruhr region of Germany, and they were not stopped, right? For two main reasons. One, France was a main decision maker in the league. They were a permanent member of the council. And second of all, Germany wasn't even a member of the league, so why would they defend them, right? So it was thought that by defending Germany, you would be defending a person who's not a member of the league against two people who are in the league. So it was a more complex and complicated issue than just defending what's right. So clearly, one of the weaknesses of the league was national interests getting involved and countries putting themselves first over world peace, and that's really one of the big weaknesses of the league. And the our last failure is the Corfu incident, which is when the League of Nations told Mussolini, "Can you please leave?" And he was like, "No." We went over this when he thought that the Greeks had killed 4 Italian people on commission with the League of Nations. He invaded the Corfu island in Greece, and then when the League of Nations was like, "Hey, can you please leave? Because what you did was low-key not cool." He was like, "So how about I don't leave?" And they were like, "What?" And he just stayed there for a while, then went back. But when the League asked him to leave, he didn't leave. And this is because the League didn't have an army to really enforce their decision, and Mussolini had a really strong army in Italy. So yeah, these are just 4 failures of the league. And then our next section is going to discuss the weakness of the league and what allowed these failures to even happen in the first place. So the league was weak, right? We evaluated this, right? We saw that some things were happening. But what were these weaknesses? The book numbers down 7 of these weaknesses, and we're going to go over them really quickly. They're really brief, really easy to understand. You just have to lock in and listen to me for just a few minutes, right? So the first weakness was that it was created by an unpopular peace settlement, right? The Paris Peace Conference left many, many countries on both sides, the haves and the have-nots, very disappointed, right? The Allies, Italy was disappointed for the most part. France was kind of disappointed for how Germany wasn't treated as harshly. Germany, Austria, Hungary, all those countries were disappointed because they didn't, they got carved up. They didn't like that. So people were kind of not really keen to join as it was created by an unpopular peace settlement and they didn't support the settlement that created it. Also, a lot of major powers were not in it, meaning that it didn't really have that much authority over countries like Russia, the USA, and Germany, which were huge players at the time and before that. So it was like they're not in it. And the USA was one of the main like countries trying to make the League of Nations. And then when they don't join, it makes it seem like it's less credible, reduces their global standing, and it reduces their global influence, make it seem more like a European thing, since the United States was not involved. They weren't involved, so it doesn't really have an impact on the Americas. Very few other countries joined. Brazil was in it, but Brazil wasn't really a big player in the world at the time, even though it was a huge country. Not having the USA really was like a broken leg for this league. Also, the impact of other organizations, right? The Council of Ambassadors that we mentioned before. The Council of Ambassadors was an intergovernmental agency founded in 1920 with the task of implementing the Paris Peace Settlement and mediating territorial disputes between European states. Chaired by the French Foreign Minister, the other nations represented were Britain, Italy, and Japan. In view of its decision to not ratify the Paris Peace Settlement, the USA had observer status only, meaning it could oversee the rulings but had no power to change them. This sounds familiar, right? It's basically the League and the International Court of Justice, the World Court, summed up into one organization. So with organizations like this, people weren't really rushing to join the League. They weren't really running into the League. They were like, you know what? The League is there, but we also have this. And countries sometimes would rather that than the League. Maybe the Council of Ambassadors was more efficient in their decision making. The competition that was going on with other organizations was not making a good case for the League. The League was also notorious for its need for unanimity in both the Council and the General Assembly. This meant that if one country was against something, the League couldn't do anything. This is what happened in Corfu. Italy was against the League asking to remove, so they couldn't ask Italy to remove its troops from Corfu, even though almost every other country was in favor of it. Same thing happened with the Ruhr. France and Belgium were against it, since they voted against it in the General Assembly and in the Council. It didn't pass, and even though every other country voted in favor of it. So that really was a weakness, since it made it way less efficient. And this need for unanimity being a weakness is going to appear much more often in the next chapter, in chapter 3, and you're going to see how it affects the League's progress as it continues. Also, the League had no army. The UN right now has an army. It's not really that much trained, but it's an army, and it has armies with guns. It has manpower to execute its peacekeeping missions and protect its peacekeepers. The League relied on member states, meaning that if member states did not pitch in, the League had no real military authority. And sometimes when you're being faced with people like Mussolini, people like Hitler, who we're going to meet in the next chapter, Hideki Tojo, who we're also going to meet in the next chapter, these people needed to be contrasted with military strength. The League not having that really weakened it against these people. And it's eventually what made it irrelevant by the end of the 1930s, by the start of World War II. Also, member states were putting their own national interests before their commitment to the League. This was, for example, Italy voting in favor of keeping its troops in Corfu, even though it was not right and it was against the League's principles of preventing wars and protecting borders. Same thing with the Ruhr crisis, where France and Belgium would rather their own national interests be protected. So really, this is basically when they're being selfish. They're being really selfish, only wanting what's good for their country instead of thinking of what's good for the world and the League as a whole. So these 7 weaknesses, which were created by an unpopular peace settlement, major powers that were excluded, the USA refusing to join specifically, other organizations competing, the need for unanimity, the lack of an army, and national interest coming before League interest, are the main reasons why the League was unable to be as successful as it should have been. And now we finally reach the last section of 2.4, 2.4D. This is the roles and impacts of the agencies. The first agency we're going to discuss is the International Labor Organization. These agencies are pretty straightforward. We're just going to discuss what they fought for, how they did it, were they effective. In brief, these all were effective in their own time, but overall, historically, not really, sometimes really not effective. So let's just enumerate them all as sometimes effective. First, the International Labor Organization. Their main issue was protecting workers' rights. At the time, workers were not really treated well. You had factory workers who were overworked. They were literally being enslaved by these industrialist guys. It was not a good look. It was not a good thing that was going on in the world. So what the ILO did, International Labor Organization, they were like, you know what? Let's standardize work and work environments and work ethic. So therefore, the workplace became more bearable. They established certain limits for who could work, who couldn't work, and this was really necessary for the time, but it was more the impact that the countries did domestically rather than what the International Labor Organization did in the League of Nations that helped standardize work hours and stuff like that. So were they effective? Not really. Were they necessary? Yes, they were very necessary. And perhaps one could argue that without them existing, countries wouldn't have standardized, but it's a really big assumption. On their own, if they would have stood on their own, they wouldn't have done anything. And the International Commission for Refugees. Once again, you had refugees all over the world. It was just the end of World War One. We needed to repatriate these people right now. So what this committee do? It was arrange ways for refugees to get back home, for refugees to be settled even in their new places, and for basically refugees to be treated ethically, right? Because some countries might have treated them as second-class citizens, or maybe just just thrown them out. The International Commission for Refugees made sure that these refugees were properly settled in the countries that they were being hosted in, and that they wouldn't become a burden for the country that they would then grow to resent. So really useful. There are no cases of it really being effective, but it was a really useful agency, and it really was necessary for the time, especially since there were some people spread out after World War One. So definitely necessary, definitely good, and definitely did its work. The Health Organization. This is the average, the equivalent of the World Health Organization today. They conduct research on health. They develop new vaccines, develop new medicine, and overall, they just really regulate worldwide medicine and like procedures, what's legal, what's not. So during this time, mind you, they were still doing lobotomies, and they hadn't said that lobotomies were illegal. And a lobotomy is basically put a stick up your nose into your brain. That's really not ethical. And they were still doing this at this time. So the health organization really didn't do its job of keeping the ethical guidelines of medicine in where they should have been. However, they did develop new medicine. They did help really keep world health standardized and did help get medicine to places that needed it, even if they didn't have a strong medicinal system in their own country. The last commission we're going to discuss is the Mandates Commission. As you guys know, in the end of World War One, there were a lot of mandates. The mandate of Iraq, the mandates taken away from Germany, the mandates for Syria, the mandates for Lebanon. All those mandates in the Middle East and in Africa were driving people crazy, right? And they had to be standardized and administered by a commission, right? Since mandates are internationally administered pieces of land. So basically, even though they ended up going to specific countries, the idea of mandates were that they be kept international. So this was the least effective and the least worthwhile of the ones that I have mentioned today, as it didn't do its job. It really didn't. Mandates ended up going to different countries. The territories of Germany ended up being split up between France and Britain. So it was like, you didn't do your job. You really didn't. So you didn't have a need to exist. However, if they had done their job, they would have been instrumental in maintaining international zones, like, international cities, definitely international territory, and that would have been their job, keeping international territory prosperable and growing and governing over these areas of land that were supposed to be internationally administered. However, since that was not the case, once again, not effective, not really necessary. So yeah, that's all for today, guys. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to AICE Textbook Translated. Once again, this is the key to ACE, all your ACE exams. And yeah, see you guys later. Don't forget to pass.